They left for a routine dive a father and daughter experienced, calm, familiar with the ocean like it was a second home. But by sunset, their boat had returned without them, no signs of a struggle, no distress call, just a half-eaten sandwich and 2 missing souls. For days, no one could explain what happened. But their sister refused to accept the silence. And when she uncovered their dive logs, an erased name, and footage that was never meant to be seen, the truth she found wasn't an accident. It was a choice. It started as a quiet ripple, the kind the ocean makes when no one is watching. By the time anyone noticed, it was already too late. A boat adrift, bobbing gently in the afternoon sun, the waves licking its edges with the indifference of time. Inside, silence. No movement, no sound, no sign of the two who had left shore that morning with smiles and wetsuits and promises of a quick dive. A father, a daughter, gone. Before we go deeper into the chilling disappearance of a father and daughter swallowed by the sea, and the heartbreaking truth their sister uncovered, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue telling stories that others have left buried. Mysteries that deserve to be seen, heard, and remembered. It's a simple gesture, but it means the world to us. Thank you for being part of this journey. There was no splash, no struggle, no frantic radio call. Just absence. The kind that wraps around you slowly, until you're not sure where the fear ends and the grief begins. They had anchored just off the coast of a town too small to appear on most maps, near a reef known only to locals and old divers who still marked their charts by hand. It wasn't dangerous water. Not by any official metric. Calm, shallow, familiar, a routine dive. The kind they'd done dozens of times before. But that day, something changed. Their names were Samuel and Elise Marin. He was experienced, cautious, the kind of diver who double-checked every gauge, every knot, every breath. She was 17, curious, bold in the way only daughters of careful fathers can afford to be. They shared the kind of bond forged by years underwater, of signals passed between glances, of trust measured in the slow exhale of a regulator. They were seen that morning, laughing, loading tanks. She carried a waterproof camera. He packed sandwiches. They never came back. The boat was discovered by a fisherman hours later, drifting south with the current. The dive ladder was still lowered, their gear neatly placed. 2 tanks missing, 2 sets of fins gone. Everything else intact. No water inside the boat, no signs of distress. The Coast Guard was called, then the local sheriff, then eventually the news. But there was no footage, no final message. No clue left behind that made any kind of sense. At first, there was hope. Maybe they were lost. Maybe a current pulled them farther than expected. Maybe they had surfaced on another beach, dazed but alive. Maybe. But the hours turned cold. The sky darkened. And still, nothing. Rescue became recovery. Then recovery gave way to silence. And silence is where the story lingered. People talk about closure like it's a lock that needs a key. But sometimes there's no door, no hinge, no handle. Just space. Endless, open, salt-bitten space. The kind the ocean guards fiercely, the kind that takes more than it returns. A week passed, then 2. Sonar scans came back empty. Divers came up shaking their heads. No wreck, no trace. No bodies. The ocean doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just waits. In that waiting, theories grew like coral. Was it an accident? Equipment failure? A shared panic that spiraled? Or something older, colder, something the water doesn't speak of? The questions didn't stop, but the answers never started. On the dock where they were last seen, a woman sat for hours each day, fingers curled around the straps of an unused mask. She didn't speak much, just watched the horizon as though it owed her something. Some days she whispered their names. Other days, she said nothing at all. The ocean had taken them, but it had not given them back. And beneath the stillness, something had begun to stir. The morning had been almost too perfect. The kind of day you might later call unremarkable, simply because nothing felt out of place. The sun had risen without a fight, casting soft gold across the sleepy marina. The tide was calm, the wind barely more than a breath, and the gulls circled lazily overhead, their cries muted by distance and routine. Locals remember it as clear, crisp, but gentle. A day that didn't threaten anything. A day that made promises it wouldn't keep. Samuel Marin arrived at the dock just after 7 a.m. He walked with a quiet confidence. His stride measured, his hands full with gear that had been packed the night before. Elise trailed close behind him, a duffel bouncing against her hip, laughing at something he'd said. Something no one can remember now. A joke, maybe. Or a teasing nudge passed between parent and child, the kind that doesn't feel like a goodbye until at island. They loaded the boat like they always did, deliberate, practiced. Tanks checked, gauges confirmed, dry bags sealed. The kind of preparation that comes from years spent dancing on the edge of risk. Samuel wasn't reckless. He never had been. If anything, he was methodical to a fault, his logs detailed, his checklists meticulous. Elise, though younger, had learned to mirror that. She trusted the ocean, but she trusted her father more. By 7:30, the boat pushed off from the dock. A quiet hum of the motor trailing behind as it glided toward the dive site, an offshore reef called Kelridge Hollow, named after a ship that had once wrecked nearby but left no trace but legend. It wasn't far. 20 minutes, maybe. Close enough to return for lunch. The plan was simple. A single dive, shallow depth, explore the coral shelf, maybe capture some footage. Elise had a waterproof camera with her. It was her favorite thing to bring. She liked recording the slow ballet of sea life, the way the light fractured just beneath the surface. Several people saw them leave. A few waved. One man remembered Elise turning around, giving a playful salute. No one saw them again. Their estimated dive window was 8 to 15 to 9. When the hour passed, no one noticed. When noon came and went, it was still just a quiet boat missing in a sea of countless others. The alarm wasn't raised until 3:47 p.m., when a fisherman spotted their vessel drifting in the current. He approached, called out. No answer. Just the boat, silent and slow, bobbing in time with the tide. The dive flag was still raised, the ladder still down, the cooler unopened. Authorities responded quickly. But the ocean doesn't keep memories in neat boxes. By the time they reached the area, the current had shifted. There was no sign of divers, no bubbles, no debris. Just the unoccupied boat, tethered to nothing, floating like a question no one wanted to ask out loud. The search began that evening. Helicopters, sonar, divers. But daylight had already started to fade. And with it, the trail. What had begun as a routine dive was already calcifying into a mystery. That day had started with sunlight. It ended with silence. And in the hush that followed, the town began to wonder what had really happened after they vanished beneath the waves. She hadn't planned to call that morning. There was no special reason, no urgency. Just a feeling, one of those passing instincts that comes and goes without explanation. The kind you can ignore 100 times before it ever means anything. But that day, at 10:06 a.m., Mia Marin pressed the call button on her phone and waited for her father to pick up. It rang. Then rang again. Then voicemail. She frowned, but didn't think much of it. Her father was diving. It wasn't unusual for him to miss a call, especially if they were already underwater. Elise rarely had her phone with her when she was on the boat. Either she hated the way it pulled her away from the sea. Mia sent a text instead. Let me know when you're done. Want to hear how it went. She added a dolphin emoji. It felt light, casual, appropriate. By afternoon, the message still sat unread. That, too, didn't alarm her, not right away. She told herself the cell signal out there was always spotty. They'd probably head home, rinse off their gear, get distracted, eat dinner. She'd hear from them by evening. She always did. But evening came, and nothing. The silence grew heavy in her chest, dense and shapeless. She called again. This time, both phones went straight to voicemail. No ringing. That was the moment it shifted. The air changed. She couldn't name the feeling, but she recognized its shape. An ache just behind the ribs. A quiet whisper beneath logic. Something is wrong. Mia tried to stay rational. She called the marina. No one picked up. She left a message. She tried again. Then she called a friend of her father's, a fellow diver. No, he hadn't seen them today. Yes, he'd try to find someone on the dock who might have. She didn't sleep that night. Not really. Her mind filled the silence with noise. Images she couldn't stop. Fears she couldn't explain. She paced. She checked her phone every few minutes. At one point, she typed out a message to Elise, then deleted it before hitting send. What was there to say that didn't sound like panic? By the next morning, the truth had caught up with her. She received the call at 7:12 a.m. Sheriff with a voice too calm, too rehearsed. The words struck in pieces. Boat was found. No one aboard. Search underway. Mia didn't remember hanging up. She remembered the feeling afterward, though, like a floor giving out beneath her feet. She replayed their last conversation over and over in her head. It had been 2 nights ago. Elise was excited. "I want to show you the footage this time," she'd said. "The reef's starting to bloom again. It's beautiful, Mia. I wish you could see it with me." Mia had smiled and promised she'd come visit next month. Elise had laughed and said, "We'll wait for you." Those were the last words she heard. Mia returned to the town where she'd grown up, not as a sister or a daughter, but as something else entirely. A witness to absence. A bearer of the unspoken. While others searched the ocean, she searched the spaces in between old notebooks, half-finished letters, voice memos, dive logs. She began to see patterns and questions, so many questions. She wasn't looking for closure, not anymore. She was looking for something deeper, something hidden in the murk her family had vanished into. Because she understood now, her story would not be about their disappearance. It would be about what they had left behind, and what waited to be uncovered. It had been tucked away in the back of a drawer, buried beneath faded maps and a rusted compass that no longer pointed anywhere. Mia found it by accident, or perhaps by invitation. The drawer creaked when she opened it, swollen slightly from years of sea air. Inside, wrapped in a brittle towel that still smelled faintly of brine, was her father's dive log. Leather-bound, frayed at the edges, the corners warped by salt water and time. It had always been with him. He never left for the ocean without it. She ran her fingers along the cover before opening it, almost afraid of what she'd find. The pages stuck together in places, the ink blotted by dampness, but most of it was still legible. Each entry was dated, annotated in his distinct, looping script, meticulous but not cold. He wrote like someone who believed in the poetry of precision. Temperatures, depths, coordinates, but also notes like Elise spotted a turtle today, she named him Basil. Or clear water, good visibility felt peaceful. These weren't just logs, they were moments. Memories caught in ink and salt. The early entries spanned years. Some went back to before Elise was born. Mia flipped through them with reverence, watching her father's life unfold beneath the surface of oceans and time. There were dozens of dives, hundreds. Some mundane, others filled with quiet awe. As she moved closer to the recent pages, the tone shifted subtly. The affection was still there, but the notes grew shorter, clipped, sometimes angry. Saw the markers again, 3 red buoys, not listed on any chart. Night dive felt like something was watching. Elise says, I'm being paranoid. Avoid Hollows Point. Dive shop owner warned me. Doesn't feel right. Mia paused, reading that line again. She knew Hollows Point. It was the unofficial name for the reef near where they disappeared. Her fingers trembled slightly as she turned the page. The final entry was dated 3 days before the dive. The handwriting was different, shaky, uneven, like it had been written in a hurry. The ink had bled, and parts were illegible. But fragments stood out, sharp and heavy. It was right. Something's down there, not just wreckage. Elise thinks it's man-made, wants to go back. I told her no. As warned me. Too late now? Mia read it again. Then again, as. The initials were underlined twice, hard enough that the pressure had nearly torn the page. The rest of the note was a smear of water-damaged sentences. Some words ghosted on the page deeper, signal, pulling, but they didn't make sense. Not yet. She stared at the log, the weight of it settling in her lap. This wasn't just a record of dives. It was a map of descent, not just into water, but into something else. Something her father hadn't fully understood, or maybe had understood too well, and kept hidden behind half-truths and salt-stained pages. Mia closed the book gently, holding it like a relic. The name A.S. echoed in her mind, cold and unfinished. Whoever it was, they had known something. And her father had trusted them. Or feared them, maybe both. But now, the truth was all that remained. In salt, in silence, in ink that refused to fade. The reports came in neat lines and clinical language. Diagrams, currents, probabilities. The official conclusion was wrapped in logic and wrapped again in the comfortable veil of plausible accident. Unfavorable tidal shifts, the summary read. Unexpected undertow activity due to seasonal changes. Mia had read the report 3 times. Each time, it rang hollow. Like someone speaking confidently about a place they had never actually seen. The kind of tidy answer meant to close a case, not open one. But the sea doesn't operate by paperwork, and neither did her father. Mia found herself at the edge of the dock again. The same one where Samuel and Elise had pushed off that morning, now sun-bleached and humming with heat. It hadn't changed, not outwardly. But it felt different, as though it too had been holding its breath. A man stood a few paces down, broad shoulders, weathered hands, a ball cap pulled low over salt and pepper hair. He turned slightly when he heard her approach. It was Henry Laney, a longtime friend of her father's. They'd dived together for nearly a decade, sometimes for work, often for peace. He was the kind of man who didn't speak unless he meant it, and when he did, his words carried weight like submerged stone. I heard you're asking questions, he said simply, eyes fixed on the water. Mia nodded. They said it was the current. Henry snorted softly, not unkindly. They always do. She waited. He knew those tides, Henry continued. Better than most. He was cautious. Too cautious to misread them. Hell, he'd postpone for fog if he didn't like the air pressure. Wouldn't even start the engine if the moon was off. He read the water like it was language. Mia looked out at the expanse. It was calm today. Still. But that meant nothing. The sea could shift moods without warning. She knew that. They said there was a swell, she offered. There was, Henry admitted. But not the kind that swallows trained divers whole. Not at that site. Not at those depths. He finally turned to face her. His eyes were tired, rimmed red, not from grief, but from suspicion left to rot in silence. I talked to Sam the week before. He mentioned something strange, said he'd felt a change. In the reef, like the current was wrong, pulling in weird patterns. Not stronger, just off. Twisting instead of pushing. He was uneasy. Mia pulled the dive log from her bag, opened to the last page. She handed it to him wordlessly. Henry read slowly, his expression unreadable. When he reached the underlined initials, he exhaled. "Ayez," he murmured. "Adrian Shore." "Who is he?" Henry shook his head. "Old-timer. Ran the dive shop before he vanished last winter. Sam and Adrian used to talk, obsess over the Hollow's sonar readings. Adrian was convinced there was something unnatural about the trench. Said it had its own rhythm, its own gravity." Mia felt the chill pass through her. "Do you believe him?" Henry didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned back to the sea. The wind had picked up, subtle but present, the kind of shift only someone watching closely would notice. "The ocean tells the truth," he said finally. "You just have to know how to listen." Sam did. "That's why I don't buy what they're selling." The current didn't take him. And with that, he walked away, leaving Mia with the silence and a growing certainty that the answers she needed wouldn't come from the surface. The boat floated in slow, purposeless circles, nudged by the gentlest of waves. It was spotted just after 4 in the afternoon by a fisherman returning from the outer reef. From a distance, it didn't look unusual. A small dive vessel, engine idle, drifting near the edge of a current line. Boats lose anchor all the time. It happens. But as he approached, the stillness felt too still. There was no movement, no figures on deck, no sound save the slap of water against the hull. The man radioed it in, his voice uncertain. Coast Guard patrol reached it within the hour. The boat was undamaged, untouched. And yet, from the moment they climbed aboard, something was wrong. It wasn't just what they saw, it was what they didn't. The keys were still in the ignition, turned halfway, as if someone had meant to restart the engine but never did. A half-eaten sandwich sat on a paper plate near the console. The crust hardened slightly from the sundae. 2 pairs of flippers rested on the deck, perfectly aligned as though they had been placed there deliberately. The dive ladder was lowered, its rungs slick with salt. The oxygen gauges on the 2 spare tanks were full, everything in its place, except them. No signs of a struggle, no broken railing, no blood, no distress flare. The boat was eerily orderly. It was as if Samuel and Elise had simply stepped off the side and forgotten to return. One of the officers later described the atmosphere on the boat as hollow, not empty, but hollow. As though something had been pulled out of it. Some essence, some presence that should have lingered but didn't. He walked the perimeter 3 times, looking for clues, for an explanation, for something more than absence. He found a wet towel, wrung out and folded. A camera bag. Elise's hat tucked beneath the bench, its brim stiff with salt. Mia saw the photos days later. By then, the boat had already been towed to the marina, cordoned off with yellow tape that fluttered weakly in the breeze. She stood in front of it for a long time, unable to make herself climb aboard. From the dock, she could see the shadows of footprints on the deck, preserved faintly in salt and time. They looked like ghosts trying to walk home. The Coast Guard had logged it as an unexplained disappearance at sea, a phrase that sounded definitive but meant nothing. The prevailing theory was simple. Something had gone wrong underwater, a miscalculation. A rapid descent, disorientation. One followed the other, and neither returned. But the boat didn't support that theory. It was too undisturbed. She asked the officer about the anchor. He paused, then admitted it had still been deployed when they arrived. Stuck in sand, rope taut. Which meant the boat hadn't drifted from a failed anchoring. It had been set. Left intentionally, left behind. Later, alone at the marina, Mia sat on the edge of the dock, watching the tide lap gently against the hull. It didn't make sense. Nothing about it did. There were no answers. Only items, arranged like a still life of absence. A sandwich uneaten, flippers unused, a daughter's hat in the wrong place. Whatever had happened out there had left no sign of violence. No mark of struggle. It had only left space. A silence so complete, it felt like a scream. It began slowly, so subtly that even those closest to him wouldn't have noticed at first. Samuel Marin, once a man of measured routines and even temper, started to drift in ways that had nothing to do with the sea. Mia remembered it in pieces now, like fragments of a dream she hadn't realized was important until it was already dissolving. He started taking night dives alone. At first, he said it helped him sleep, that the quiet of the ocean beneath the moon was the only thing that silenced the static in his mind. Elise thought it was strange but harmless. She even teased him about it. "Looking for mermaids in the dark, Dad," she once joked. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Something like that," he replied. And that was all. But soon the dives became more frequent, 3 nights a week, then 4. He'd come back soaked and silent, tracking seawater across the hardwood floors. His hair still dripping, his gaze unfocused. Elise started asking questions. "What are you looking for?" she asked one evening, leaning in the doorway as he rinsed off his gear. "You're always down there now." He didn't answer right away, just kept cleaning the regulator as though it required his full concentration. Finally, he said, "There's something I need to understand." It was vague, but Elise let it go. For a while. Then there were the phone calls, short, hushed conversations held just outside the house or in the truck parked in the driveway with the engine off. She heard fragments through her bedroom window. Words like readings, mapped, and once, distinctly, not natural. He never told her who he was speaking to. When she pressed, he would change the subject, or worse, go quiet. And that was when she began to worry. Not because of what he said, but because of how careful he was being not to say too much. She followed him once, took her bike and rode the coastal road until she saw his truck parked near the cliffs. The stars were sharp above, the ocean dark and glossy below. She watched from a distance as he unloaded his gear, pausing every so often to look over his shoulder. He dove alone that night, just like all the others. He stayed under for nearly 40 minutes. When he returned to shore, he sat for a long time, still in his wetsuit, staring out at the water. Elise never asked him about it. She told herself it was nothing, but it wasn't nothing. She knew that now. The week before the disappearance, something changed again. Samuel grew restless, like he was racing time. He stopped eating with them. He barely slept. Elise heard him mutter to himself when he thought no one was listening. "It's close," he said once, standing over his dive map. "I know it's close." She found him later sitting in the dark, his journal open, a flashlight in one hand, a compass in the other. She tried to ask him again, "What's going on?" This time, his answer was different. "I don't want you involved." But it was already too late. Elise wasn't the kind of daughter who stepped back when asked. She began reviewing his dive logs on her own, tracing his paths. She noticed patterns, repeated coordinates, entries marked with vague warnings. She started bringing her camera on their shared dives, pointing it where he pointed, even when he told her not to. She wanted to understand what had taken hold of him, what lived in the dark corners of his mind. But she was too close now. And some questions, once asked, can't be unasked. The sea, after all, doesn't give up its secrets willingly. Neither did he. Mia arrived under a sky the color of bleached bone, the town looking smaller than she remembered, older, more brittle. The salt air clung to her skin before she even stepped out of the car. It smelled like memory, like rust and brine, and summers spent chasing waves that didn't matter. She hadn't planned on staying long. A day or two, maybe. Just enough time to collect what remained of her father's things, say goodbye in the quiet way grief sometimes demands. But the moment she stepped onto the dock, she felt it. The weight, the hush. The way the town recoiled, not openly, but subtly. As though her presence had disturbed something everyone had agreed not to touch. The marina was nearly empty, boats bobbing like forgotten thoughts. The fishermen didn't meet her eyes. The woman who ran the cafe on the corner pretended not to recognize her. Conversations stopped when she passed. It was the kind of silence that didn't happen by accident. She asked about the dive shop, Tide Point Divers, the one her father had visited for years. It sat just a block from the water, shuttered now. The windows were boarded from the inside. The sign faded and cracked, the salt having chewed away at the paint. A paper notice was taped to the door, yellowing and curled at the edges, closed until further notice. No explanation, no forwarding contact, just absence. She circled the building, half expecting someone to shout from inside. But there was nothing, no movement, no sound. Just the whisper of wind through empty streets. When she asked a shopkeeper nearby what had happened, the woman shrugged too quickly. Storm damage, she said, eyes not meeting Mia's. Owner left town, happens all the time. But it hadn't stormed in weeks. And the owner, Adrian Shore, wasn't the kind of man to leave quietly. Mia remembered him from years ago, heavy-set, sun-worn, with a voice that carried like gravel over waves. He and her father had talked often, sometimes for hours. They shared stories about deep channels, odd sonar readings, unexplained phenomena beneath the reef. To a child, it all sounded like fantasy. Now, it felt like something else. According to public records, Adrian had disappeared exactly 14 days before Samuel and Elise went missing. Not a disappearance in the dramatic sense. He hadn't gone out to sea and never returned. He'd simply left. No goodbyes, no notes. His phone disconnected. His apartment above the dive shop abandoned. Rent unpaid. As if he had simply erased himself. Mia found that too convenient. Too neat. Especially in a town where every glance felt like a secret. She visited the sheriff's office next, hoping for answers. The man behind the desk gave her the kind of smile people reserve for the bereaved, gentle, patronizing. "We looked into Adrian," he said. "Didn't find anything suspicious. He'd been planning to leave. Talked about it for weeks. Guess he finally did." She wanted to believe that. But her father's journal said otherwise. "AS warned me." Too late now? Coincidence is easy to accept when it makes the story cleaner. But Mia had never been one to chase neat stories. And something about this town, their silence, their stillness, the boarded-up dive shop rotting beneath the gulls, told her that answers wouldn't come easy. She stood once more outside the shop, staring through the dusty window pane. Somewhere in there, her father had found something. Maybe a truth, maybe a lie, but it was enough to change him. Enough to send him diving into darkness he never resurfaced from. And now it was her turn. To knock on doors that didn't want to open. To pull threads others had long since buried. The ocean had taken her family. But the town knew something. She could feel it in every glance that slid away too quickly. And she wasn't going to leave until she found out why. It was never marked on official dive maps, not in any way that mattered. No buoy, no signpost. Just whispers passed between old fishermen and stubborn divers who had ventured too far or too deep. They called it the Forgotten Wreck. Some said it was the remains of a cargo ship. Others claimed it predated steel hulls entirely. Something wooden and rotted, pulled apart slowly over centuries. Whatever its origin, it was shrouded in a kind of local superstition. Off limits, they'd say, with a glance over their shoulder. Not illegal, just unspoken. Mia heard about it from a boy, barely out of high school, who cleaned rental gear at the harbor. He wasn't supposed to talk, but he did anyway, drawn by her presence or maybe by the weight of his own curiosity. "They don't want you going out there," he said in a low voice, eyes darting toward the older men drinking coffee nearby. "Not because it's dangerous, because they're scared of what you'll find." She took a small boat the next morning, leaving before dawn cracked the horizon. The engine coughed against the still air as she followed a hand-drawn map the boy had sketched on the back of a receipt. Coordinates scrawled next to a simple warning: "Don't stay too long." The water was unusually calm, like glass that remembered storms. As she dropped anchor near the supposed site, the surface offered nothing, no sign of what slept below. She suited up in silence, her fingers moving with mechanical resolve. Weight belt, regulator, mask. She had learned from her father. Every motion precise, every breath measured. She descended slowly, surrounded by blue. The deeper she went, the colder it became, the light thinning into shades of gray. Then, through the dim haze, it appeared. The wreck was more bone than body now. Skeletal ribs of metal or wood, it was hard to tell, wrapped in seaweed and softened by coral. It didn't look like it had sunk violently. No torn hull or shattered decks. It looked like it had settled, laid itself down. And around it, silence. No fish, no movement. Just the sound of her own breath, amplified in her mask like a heartbeat. She moved carefully, scanning the structure. It wasn't large, but it was wrong-angled oddly, half swallowed by the seafloor. Part of the frame had collapsed inward, forming a cave-like mouth. As she passed, her flashlight caught a glint of plastic, wedged deep in the coral. It was a camera. She pried it loose, bubbles rising sharply as she worked it free. The casing was cracked, its lens fractured. Algae coated the sides like a second skin. But as she turned it in her hands, she saw the small door still latched shut. Inside, sealed in a thin waterproof casing, was a memory card. Her pulse quickened. She surfaced faster than she should have, kicking through the last few meters of water with burning lungs and frantic hands. On the deck of the boat, she peeled off her mask and stared at the card in the sunlight. It was real. It had survived. Somehow. She didn't know whose it had been. Maybe a tourist. Maybe a diver like her father. Maybe Elise. The thought chilled her. Back on land, she didn't speak to anyone. She didn't want their warnings, their silences, their wary eyes. She wanted truth, raw and unfiltered. The kind only a lens can capture when no one's watching. Later that night, in the quiet of her borrowed room, she connected the card to her laptop. The folder opened instantly. Inside were 6 videos. Unlabeled. Undated. And the first one was titled simply, Descent. The screen lit up in dim blue, the playback window opening with a quiet click. The first frame was nearly all static horizontal bands of digital noise warping the image, flickering as if the camera itself had hesitated before remembering what it was meant to show. Mia leaned forward, heart loud in her ears, eyes locked on the screen. The video began with water, cold, dark, all-encompassing. Bubbles rose past the lens as the diver descended slowly, the light from a small torch carving a narrow beam through the murk. It swayed gently with the current, catching brief glimpses of coral, rock, sand, familiar textures blurred by the camera's aged optics. Then a voice crackled through, muffled but unmistakable. "Still recording?" It was Elise. Mia knew her sister's voice, even through layers of distortion. She sounded breathless, excited. "Dad thinks we're close." The frame jolted, adjusted, then centered on a figure just ahead, her father, Samuel, moving with purpose through the water. His movements were deliberate, controlled. He turned to look back once, and in the faint light, Mia saw his face through the mask. Tense, focused, not afraid exactly, but on edge in a way she had never seen in photographs or memories. He pointed forward, toward a looming shadow in the distance. The camera dipped, panned toward where his gloved hand directed. What emerged from the dark was not a shipwreck. It looked like a wall at first, smooth, too smooth for stone. Covered in sediment and sea growth. But beneath the decay, the surface was geometric, angled, carved. A pattern etched faintly into it, repetitive and unnatural. Something man-made, or something pretending to be. "What is that?" Elise asked, her voice more curious than frightened. The camera caught her swimming closer, her torch flickering as she passed too near the lens. Samuel's voice came through faintly, just a whisper against the rush of the ocean. It's not on any maps. Adrian thought it was volcanic. I don't think so anymore. The light scanned across a narrow crevice at the base of the structure. Inside was a cavity that seemed to inhale darkness. It wasn't the depth that unsettled Mia, it was the shape. Perfectly arched, too symmetrical. Like a door, waiting. The camera shook slightly, the signal warping again. Audio dropped in and out as Elise swam closer, her silhouette barely visible against the yawning black. Then something moved. A flicker just beyond the edge of the light. Not a fish, not coral swaying in current. It moved with intent, fast, smooth, just a blur in the shadows. Samuel pulled her back. The footage jerked as if the camera had been knocked off balance. "Get back," he said, firm now. The image pixelated violently, colors inverted. The sound of breathing turned rapid, harsh, then static bloomed across the screen. But just before the feed cut out completely, one final phrase slipped through, distorted, fragmented, yet unmistakably his. "It's not a wreck, it's..." The screen went black. Mia sat frozen in the glow of her laptop, her breath shallow. She waited, hoping the file would continue, reveal what came next. It didn't. The silence that followed was heavier than the video itself. Whatever her father had seen, whatever had changed him, it hadn't been decay or ruin. It had been something else, something older. And now, she had seen it too. The building was plain and forgettable. A squat structure tucked between a shuttered bait shop and a crumbling diner that hadn't served coffee in years. Inside, dust hung in the air like a second skin, and the fluorescent lights hummed with the weary rhythm of things that had outlived their purpose. This was the unofficial archive, or so Mia had been told, a place where old Coast Guard files went to fade. Staffed by one man who no longer wore the uniform but hadn't let go of the badge. His name was Glenn Rourke, retired lieutenant, 68, maybe 70, with a jaw like an anchor and hands that trembled when they were still too long. He hadn't wanted to meet her. Not at first, but something in her voice, maybe the desperation, maybe the anger buried beneath it, had shifted him. He let her in, locked the door behind her, and led her to a back room where the windows were papered shut. He didn't ask for her name. He didn't ask who she was looking for. He simply said, "It was your dad, wasn't it?" and began to pull a file from a drawer labeled Unclassified Internal Eyes Only. The folder was thick with grainy sonar prints, timestamps, coded logs, and notes scribbled in the margins with red ink. Rourke set it down with something like guilt in his eyes. "This was never meant for public record," he said. "Most of it got buried before it made the system, not scrubbed, just forgotten on purpose." Mia flipped through the first few pages. The headings were technical, dry. Unusual subsurface distortion, localized sonar deviation, acoustic feedback anomalies. But the dates caught her eye. April, May, June, the months leading up to her father's final dive. The coordinates matched, too. The site near the hollow, the same spot he had gone back to again and again. "There were reports?" she asked, unable to keep the edge from her voice. Rourke nodded slowly. "Sonar picked up a pattern about 9 months ago. At first, we thought it was equipment malfunction. Signal interference. That happens sometimes near reefs, echoes bouncing off rock formations. But this was different. Repeating sequences. Pulses that shouldn't occur in natural patterns. Like something was transmitting. Transmitting what?" He exhaled, the sound dry as parchment. "That's the question we weren't supposed to ask." Mia stared at the waveform printouts. They didn't look random. The intervals were almost mathematical, too structured for nature, too chaotic for man-made. Her stomach twisted. "Did you investigate?" He hesitated, then said, "We weren't supposed to." The way he said it made her skin crawl. Not in the tone of someone obeying orders, but someone haunted by them. They told us to mark the area as unstable. Dangerous currents. No entry recommended. But that wasn't the truth. We lost a drone down there. Just vanished mid-transmission, no warning. No debris. Just gone. And you didn't go back? Rourke's eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw fear, unpolished and raw. We tried, briefly. Then one of our divers came up shaking, said he saw lights below the sand. Moving, shifting, like something breathing. He paused, jaw tightening. 2 days later, he quit the service, moved inland, never touched water again. Mia's hands trembled slightly as she reached the last page, a map with the area circled in red, marked with a single word. Silenced. They didn't want us to know what's down there, Rourke muttered. Maybe they still don't. And for the first time since her father and sister had vanished, Mia realized this wasn't just about a family lost to the sea. This was about something hidden beneath it, something that didn't want to be found. The lock on the back door of Tide Point Divers gave way more easily than it should have. Rust had claimed the hinges, and when Mia pushed it open, it groaned like something waking after too long in the dark. The air inside was heavy with mildew and old salt, and the floor was layered in a film of dust that muffled her footsteps. Everything was exactly as it had been left hastily, and with a strange sort of urgency. A coffee mug still half full sat on the counter. Dive gear hung on hooks like empty husks. A cracked mask lay on the floor beneath a shattered shelf, untouched by time but abandoned all the same. Mia moved slowly, letting her eyes adjust to the gloom. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, only that she hadn't come this far to leave empty-handed. There had to be something left behind, something that explained why Adrian Shore had disappeared without a trace, why her father had grown so obsessed, why the answers were buried in a place no one wanted to name aloud. Behind the counter, she found a cabinet with tarnished handles and a lock that had been broken long ago. Inside, amid a stack of outdated manuals and faded brochures, was a heavy, leather-bound ledger. Its corners were frayed, the pages swollen slightly from moisture. She carried it to the front of the shop and set it beneath a sun-faded skylight, brushing dust from the cover with the edge of her sleeve. The first pages were routine: customer names, equipment rentals, dive schedules. But as she flipped further, the entries shifted. Notes appeared in the margins, strange symbols, weather conditions, obscure comments like pressure spiked near trench or visibility gone in seconds, no explanation. There were coordinates too, precise ones, some repeated, others scribbled out and overwritten. Mia traced her fingers across the entries until one stood out, a date circled in red ink. The circle was rough, almost violent, as though it had been drawn in haste or anger. The date was unmistakable. The day before her father and Elise had disappeared. Beneath it, in faint lettering, was a message. "Don't trust AS." Her breath caught. The ink had bled, but the warning was clear. It didn't make sense. Adrian Shore had written the ledger. Why would he write a warning against himself? Unless someone else had written it later. Or unless Adrian wasn't who her father believed he was. She turned the page. More coordinates, most centered around the hollow. Notes grew messier, almost frantic near the end. Sound returned last night, same intervals, drew them in again. Another note was underlined twice. Saw them watching from the ridge. Eyeshine, not fish. Mia's stomach churned. These weren't the notes of a man recording harmless dives. These were the scrawlings of someone descending into obsession or revelation. She closed the ledger carefully and sat back against the wall, dust curling in the slant of dying light. The town's silence, the official reports, the sudden closing of the dive shop, it was all connected. This place held more than equipment and air tanks. It held truths no one wanted surfaced. And now, she had one of them in her hands. A warning scribbled in desperation. A date that marked the beginning of everything. A name turned inward. Don't trust AS. It echoed in her mind, looping like the sonar pulses no one could explain. Something had happened that day before the dive. Something that had changed her father's plans, maybe even Elise's. A shift, a secret. And now, she was closer than ever. But with each discovery, the line between what was truth and what was madness grew thinner, and the water, ever patient, waited. The laptop was older than she remembered, tucked beneath a pile of dive logs and waterproof charts in a battered metal case that smelled faintly of rust and salt. Her father had always insisted on backing things up manually, no cloud, no syncing, no digital trail for anyone to follow. The ocean keeps its own records, he used to say. We don't need a server for that. At the time, it had sounded like one of his many quiet quirks. Now, it felt more like a premonition. It took nearly half an hour to bring it back to life. The screen flickered once, then again, before settling into a dull blue glow. A password prompt blinked patiently at her. Mia tried a few variations. Elise's birthday, their old street number, a favorite dive site. On the fifth try, it opened. The desktop was sparse, bare of personal photos or shortcuts, just a few folders, most named with vague labels, currents, readings, tide logs. But one stood out immediately. It was labeled Drafts, tucked inside another folder called Private. A trail meant to be hidden, but not too well. Like a secret half-spoken, waiting for the right ears. There were 6 files inside. All were text documents, all dated within the last 3 weeks of his life. Each titled with a single word: apology, for Elise, confession, to Mia, insurance, if. Mia opened the first. It was barely 2 paragraphs, written in her father's clipped, deliberate cadence. I thought I was being careful. I thought if I just kept it quiet, if I only went at night, it would stay contained. But it's not. It's growing or waking. I don't know how to say this to your face, so I'm writing it here. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have taken her with me. She blinked hard, her hands frozen over the keyboard. The guilt bled through every word, not the guilt of a mistake, but the guilt of a choice. The second letter was longer, addressed to Elise. You asked me why we kept diving the hollow. You said it felt wrong. I told you it was research. I lied. I saw something weeks ago, a shape under the ridge. It moved like it knew I was watching. I couldn't stop thinking about it. It felt like a call, not in sound and pressure. Like the sea was breathing, and we were inside its lungs. If something happens to me, I want you to forget it. Let the ocean bury this. Don't come back for me. The third was a confession. Adrian was right. It's not just sonar. It's something older, a rhythm below what our ears can hear. I thought it was geological, but it's not. It responds. It waits. I mapped it. It draws you in. Every dive I felt it closer, like a hand brushing the edge of your mind. I made her come with me. I told myself it was safe, but I think I just didn't want to go alone. Mia scrolled through the remaining files, each more fragmented than the last. Notes of insurance policies never claimed. Instructions left unfinished. Lines like, if you find this, don't trust the official report. And, if something happens, it wasn't an accident. The final letter was to her. Mia, you were always the one who saw things clearly. I never told you enough how much I admired that. You'll want to know the truth. But be careful. Some truths aren't just hidden. They're buried. For a reason. She sat back, the weight of the words pressing on her chest like the slow crush of depth. These weren't just letters. They were confessions, warnings, echoes from a man who had already begun to disappear, not physically, but spiritually dragged under by something he couldn't name. Her father hadn't been lost to a storm or a current. He had gone chasing something he didn't fully understand. And he had taken Elise with him. He checked the straps twice, then once more, out of habit. The weight belt, the pressure gauge, the regulator seal. Everything was in place, everything was routine. But nothing felt ordinary. Samuel stood at the edge of the boat, staring into the water as if it might speak to him, offer him a final warning or a reprieve. It didn't. It only shimmered, soft and silent, the morning light dancing on its surface like a secret just out of reach. Elise adjusted her mask beside him, unaware of the quiet war unraveling inside her father's chest. She was excited, focused. She had seen the footage. She had heard the strange pulses on the hydrophone. It had stirred something in her, something curious and unshaken. He had tried to protect her from the full truth, but she was her father's daughter, and some instincts cannot be silenced. When she told him she was coming with him this time, her voice had left no room for argument. "We can map it together," she'd said, smiling. "Two sets of eyes are better than one." He had nodded, but it wasn't agreement. It was surrender. They descended together. The ocean enveloped them with familiar grace. 30 feet. 40. The world above dimmed, the sky replaced by shifting gradients of blue and gray. Samuel kept glancing over his shoulder, watching her movements, the fluid confidence of someone born to the sea. She followed his lead, close but not clinging. She didn't need hand-holding. She wanted discovery. The ridge came into view slowly, its edge rising from the sand like a buried monolith. Just as the sonar had predicted, the water grew colder, subtly wrong. Elise held up her hand, signaling to stop, her camera raised. She pointed toward the trench. Samuel nodded. They hovered there, weightless, two shadows suspended over the unknown. He should have ended the dive then. Turned back. He'd promised himself he would if it felt wrong. And it did. Every instinct screamed to ascend. But he also knew they were close, closer than ever. And he wanted her to see it, just once. Maybe then she'd believe him. Maybe then she'd let it go. They swam closer to the crevice. The dark opening yawned beneath them like a throat. Sand swirled in slow spirals around the rim, drawn inward by an unseen force. The light from their torches flickered, not from current, but from interference, short, rhythmic pulses. Like a heartbeat buried deep beneath the seafloor. Then, movement. A shape sleek, indistinct, darted at the edge of their vision. Elise turned sharply, following it with her light. Samuel reached for her arm, but missed. She drifted closer. The pull grew stronger. Not physical, not water, something else, something reaching. He swam to her, grabbed her shoulder, tried to signal. Time to go, now. She hesitated. He saw it in her eyes behind the mask, the struggle between wonder and fear, between leaving and knowing. She reached out toward the void. He shook his head, pulled her back. But she broke free. In that moment, he knew. He had brought her too close. He could not save her. Not unless he stayed. He surged forward again, this time not to drag her away, but to shield her. His body between hers and the darkness, the signal pulsing harder now, almost a hum in his bones. She fought him, confused, mouthing his name through bubbles and panic. He pressed her dive computer, input the ascent command she had memorized since childhood, her failsafe. She tried to stop him. He pushed her upward. Her last sight of him was blurred by rising bubbles, his form sinking back toward the trench as her body rose unwillingly toward the fading light. He did not follow. The choice had been his. She would live. He would not. The surface was still when Mia slipped beneath it, her body disappearing into the same water that had taken them. The dive suit clung tightly to her skin, every inch of her sealed and prepared. But there was no preparing for what she felt, an ache, a pressure, not from the depth, but from something older. Something waiting. She descended slowly, the familiar thrum of her breathing in the regulator the only sound that accompanied her. 30 feet, 40. The water grew colder, though not by temperature alone. It was a coldness that lived in memory, in fear. Her father had come this way. Elise too. The same descent. The same path. But they had not returned. She followed the GPS coordinates etched in the margins of the ledger. Her flashlight cut a narrow beam through the gloom, and already the seafloor was shifting beneath her, once familiar, now foreign. The sand no longer lay still. It curled and twisted, like something breathing just beneath it. And then she saw it. It didn't look like wreckage. There were no broken planks, no rusting steel. What rose out of the seabed was stone, massive, deliberate, and impossibly smooth. Angled surfaces, symmetrical lines. Not something tossed here by accident, not shaped by tide or time. It stood tall, the upper edge buried in silt, like the tip of a pyramid submerged in silence. She swam closer, her torch tracing the sharp reliefs etched into its surface. Symbols, not letters, not anything she recognized. They pulsed faintly beneath layers of algae, as if reacting to her presence, though she told herself it was only the play of light. Still, she felt watched, not from any one direction, but from everywhere at once. Further in, she found the opening. A narrow passage leading down into black, perfectly arched. Its geometry unnatural for coral or erosion. It resembled a doorway. An invitation. Her heart pounded against her chest, but she didn't hesitate. She was past hesitation now. Inside, the world narrowed. Her torch caught flashes of other carvings, spirals, concentric rings, patterns that looked both mechanical and organic. The walls pressed close around her. The current no longer felt random. It guided her, nudged her forward. She reached what looked like a chamber, though the word felt insufficient. It was too vast, too silent. Her light flickered and caught on something embedded in the stone, a metallic panel, out of place, almost new. It pulsed once, then again. Then the hum began. Low, vibrating in her bones. She backed away instinctively, her hand brushing against the wall. It was warm, not just in temperature, but alive. Her oxygen gauge blinked, 40% remaining. Time was thinning. She looked once more into the depths of the chamber, into that impossible stillness, and for a moment she thought she saw something move. Not swim, not drift, move. She turned and began her ascent. The way back felt longer, the water heavier. Her limbs ached with exhaustion. But the pressure inside her chest was no longer panic, it was knowing. She had seen what they saw. And it was not a wreck, not a ruin, it was a structure built to last, maybe built to wait. As she broke the surface and gasped for air, the sky above was the same as before, but nothing else was. The sea had shown her something, and now, it would never let her forget. It began somewhere between depth and disorientation. Not in the pressure of the water against her skin, not in the weight of her oxygen tank or the flicker of her torchlight, but in the silence. The kind of silence that doesn't just surround you, but seeps into you, like silt into lungs. Mia hovered there, suspended in the cold, dark, the strange stone structure beneath her, and something inside her began to unravel. The whispers started softly. At first, she thought it was the hiss of her regulator, distorted by nerves and solitude. But these had cadence, rhythm. Not words exactly, but something close enough to shape meaning. A low chorus that seemed to rise not from her ears but from the bones of the sea itself. She turned, scanning the void with her torch. Nothing. Just the endless shift of current, the slow dance of plankton caught in her beam. But then she saw the shadows. At the edge of her light, something moved, long, sinuous, deliberate. Too fluid for a person, too precise for a fish. It disappeared before she could focus on it, slipping into the dark like a breath drawn and held. Another passed behind her, closer this time. Her body tensed, instinct screaming, but her mind curiously remained calm. Not safe, but familiar. As if some part of her had always known this moment was coming. Her father had known it too. That thought pierced her like a harpoon. The whispers shifted, low murmurs curling around her like tendrils. Shapes drifted just beyond the edges of perception. She turned in slow circles, breath measured, eyes wide. The structure below pulsed faintly, as though responding to her presence again. But this time, it wasn't waiting. It was watching. Mia closed her eyes, just for a second, and the darkness behind her lids deepened, and in it, she saw them. Not memories, not dreams, something more. Elise, drifting just ahead, turning to look back, eyes wide with wonder. Samuel, hands outstretched, reaching not for her, but toward something unseen. Something pulling him forward. A light in the trench, impossibly bright, impossibly deep. And in its glow, forms, towers, spirals, openings that breathed. They weren't gone, not in the way the world thought. They had followed something, or been followed. When Mia opened her eyes, she was crying. The salt water masked it, but the tears came all the same, rising from a place no amount of training had ever taught her to suppress. The grief hit her in waves, what she had lost, what she had ignored, the pieces of her family that had slipped beneath the surface long before the final dive. They hadn't just vanished, they had been chosen, or had chosen themselves. Her torch began to dim. Her oxygen gauge blinked red. She looked up. The surface felt impossibly far, a smear of silver high above. Her limbs moved slowly, resisting the urge to stay, to sink, to listen. The whispers rose again, now almost words, almost voices she knew. Stay. We see you. You belong. She kicked harder, rising through the cold like waking from a fevered dream. The light above fractured, then widened. Her head broke the surface with a gasp that tore the silence apart. She clawed at air, at clarity. Her mask fogged. The sky was pale and endless. She floated there, breath after breath after breath, until the world returned. But something had changed. In her body, in her mind, in the part of her that had looked into the deep and heard it speak back. She was not alone anymore. And she would never be the same. The footage was corrupt, partially degraded from time and pressure, but the recovered frames told a story more vivid than anything Mia could have imagined. She played it in silence, the glow of her laptop casting pale light against the walls of the motel room. No background noise, no distractions. Just the soft hum of the hard drive and the slow, pulsing dread of knowing this was the last time they had been seen alive. The dive was already in progress when the video began. Elise's voice broke through first, distorted by the water, but unmistakably hers. "It's beautiful," she said, a breathless awe woven into her tone. Then came her father's voice, low and more deliberate. "We don't have much time. Just record everything." The camera bobbed as it was passed between them. The light swept across the submerged structure, its impossible angles catching reflections that bent in unnatural ways. A humming sound pulsed intermittently, faint but present, like sonar twisted into something organic. Beneath the hum, a thrum, a heartbeat. Elise drifted closer to the opening of the trench, filming intricate symbols along the edge of the stone. Samuel hovered behind her, checking his dive computer, scanning the dark. He looked afraid. Not of drowning, not of creatures, but of the decision he knew was coming. Then the current shifted. On screen, the sand stirred violently. Elise turned quickly. "Dad?" The humming intensified. What happened next wasn't chaos, it was precise. A force moved through the water, invisible but undeniable, pulling Elise toward the opening. Samuel darted forward, wrapped an arm around her, and planted his feet against the stone to push them both away. It worked for a moment, then the pull grew stronger. She reached out, not in panic, but in curiosity, as though hypnotized by something unseen. The camera spun as it was clipped back onto Elise's harness. The angle locked, Catching the moment, Samuel grabbed her by the shoulders and stared into her face. His expression held no fear, only resolve. He activated her emergency ascent on the wrist computer she wore. She realized what he was doing seconds too late. She fought him. She kicked, tried to disable the command, tried to hold on to him. But he was stronger, just this once. He pressed her mask gently, then turned her body toward the surface. Mia saw her sister cry out behind the mask, bubbles rushing from her regulator. She didn't want to go. She didn't want to leave him. But the current surged upward. The failsafe pulled her with it. Samuel watched until she disappeared from view, swallowed by light above. Then he turned back to the structure. He didn't try to fight it anymore. He let himself drift. The camera remained on until the very end. It recorded his silhouette moving toward the trench, the light from his torch blinking once, then twice. And then, darkness. A hum, a flicker, and silence. Mia stared at the screen long after the video ended. Her breath came slow, steady. There was no villain, no crime. Only love, stronger than survival. Her father hadn't been consumed by madness or dragged to death by something unknown. He had made a choice. And so had Elise. When Mia had surfaced after her dive, she had assumed her sister had been pulled under, lost, taken. But now she understood. Elise had been rescued, and she had returned. To him, love over life. Mia closed the laptop with trembling hands. The truth was heavier than any lie, but it was also beautiful in its own way, a story not of loss, but of devotion so complete it defied every instinct to live. They hadn't vanished. They had chosen to remain, together, in the deep. The morning sky was pale and indifferent, a thin veil of clouds stretching toward the horizon like gauze. The sea was calm, eerily so, as though it, too, was holding its breath. Mia stood at the edge of the rocks overlooking the cove, where the tide came in slow and soft, curling around the stones like fingers brushing against memory. The wind tugged gently at the sleeves of her jacket, carrying the scent of salt and kelp and something older, more sacred. This was where it ended. Or maybe, where it simply paused. She held the dive mask in her hands, the rubber worn smooth from years of use. Elise's mask, the same one from the footage, the same one that had surfaced with her when the ocean gave her back. Mia had kept it close since then, unable to put it away, unwilling to accept its silence. But now, she understood. The mask had done its job. It had seen what it needed to see, and so had she. Next to her, a flat river stone sat in her palm, smoothed by time and tide. Around it, she had wrapped a letter just one page, written in the quiet hours of the night when grief burned hot and words came slow. She didn't try to explain everything in it. Some things weren't meant to be explained. She wrote what mattered, that she forgave them, that she loved them, that she knew now why they had stayed. She had imagined this moment so many times, returning to the sea, demanding answers, clawing back what had been taken. But the ocean never promised clarity. It offered no justice, no redemption, only depth. And in that depth, Mia had found something better than understanding. She had found peace. She stepped forward and knelt, placing the mask gently on the tide-washed stone, the letter resting beneath it, secured by the river rock. The tide would come in soon. The water would take it softly, slowly, the way it took everything, not in cruelty but in continuation. Mia didn't resist it. She let it go. She sat there for a long while after, knees damp, eyes fixed on the horizon. In the distance, the sea shimmered with a stillness that belied its mystery. Somewhere beneath that surface, they remained. Not lost, not gone, just elsewhere, a place untouched by time, a place that didn't need names or explanations. People in town still whispered. They avoided her gaze, spoke of tragedy in hushed tones, filled the empty spaces with guesses and fears. But Mia no longer needed their versions of the story. She had her own now, one that lived in sonar pulses and ancient stone, in shadows that moved with meaning, in a love so deep it didn't need a surface. When the tide finally reached the stone, it rolled in gently, soaking the letter first, then lifting the mask like a cradle. The current tugged once, then again, then carried it away into the gray, into the silence, into the graveyard of salt and memory, where all stories eventually dissolve. Mia watched until it was gone. Then she stood, turned away from the sea, and walked back up the shore. Her footprints faded behind her with each step, washed clean by the same hands that had once taken everything. And in that erasure, she found peace.